A custodian thinks he can repair this? Cassandra Price's voice oozed disdain as she motioned toward the sputtering engine on the conference table. Diamonds on her bracelet scattered the boardroom lights as she theatrically pinched her nose. "You even reek of motor oil." Malik Johnson froze in the doorway, fingers tightening around the trash bags in his rough, work-worn hands. 20 high-ranking executives stared at him as if someone had dragged a stray mutt into a country club. Cassandra rose from her leather chair, crimson Louboutins ticking against the marble like a metronome of judgment. She stopped inches from Malik, her designer perfume wrapping around him like a hostile cloud. "Here's a proposition, janitor," she purred. "Fix this $2 million engine that MIT engineers couldn't, and I'll marry you on the spot." She snapped her fingers in front of his face as though summoning a waiter. "When you fail, and you will, security walks you out for good." The room seemed to inhale at once. $50 million in pending contracts depended on the dead machine between them. Have you ever been brushed off so brutally that someone essentially bets their entire reputation on you falling flat? That was the wager Cassandra placed on Malik's humiliation. Tech vanguard systems rose out of Silicon Valley's concrete sprawl like a shining monument to ambition. The 40-story glass tower housed America's most hyped autonomous vehicle startup, where billion-dollar fantasies were sketched in minimalist conference rooms that smelled like leather, espresso, and anxiety. Cassandra Price had carved this empire with surgical ruthlessness. At 42, she governed through fear, her silver blonde hair always yanked into a flawless twist, her power suits tailored like armor. Magazines called her a visionary, a disruptor, the queen of self-driving logistics. Employees used different titles when doors were closed, and Slack messages were private. The company's prize trophy sat crippled on the executive table, a next-generation AI-guided engine meant to power their fleet of self-driving delivery trucks. This wasn't just another prototype. It was 3 years of obsession, 47 patents, and the collective ego of Silicon Valley's loudest engineering minds turned into metal and code. On paper, the system could push autonomous delivery vehicles with 93% energy efficiency, poised to reshape the logistics world overnight. In reality, the thing had become a very expensive paperweight. For 6 agonizing weeks, the engine had mocked every attempt to revive it. 3 separate teams of Ivy League all-stars had taken their swing and whiffed. 67 diagnostic runs had produced nothing but confusion, failure, and increasingly desperate PowerPoint decks. Every test ended the same way. The engine spun up, hummed along for exactly 14 minutes and 37 seconds, then overheated and crashed with the same stubborn error. Harmonic disruption detected. Malik Johnson had walked every hallway of Tech Vanguard's gleaming headquarters. For 3 years, he'd pushed his maintenance cart along the marble floors. A ghost employees sidestepped without seeing. His badge read, Technical Support Consultant, but everyone knew the unspoken label, Janitor. He emptied trash cans, scrubbed ghostly coffee rings from glass tables, and swallowed the daily sting of being the most educated custodian in the building. His associate's degree in mechanical engineering from a community college hung in a cheap frame above his kitchenette, a relic from a life that had almost gone differently. Most of his classmates had transferred to big-name universities. Malik chose something else. His mother's medical bills didn't leave room for prestige. Her cancer treatments cost $3,000 a session. Insurance covered 60%. The math was simple, merciless, and left no room for dorm rooms or campus parties. Meanwhile, the engine crisis grew like a tumor inside Tech Vanguard. Cassandra's morning briefings escalated from brisk updates to full-blown tirades. She stalked the boardroom like a caged panther, heels snapping against marble in sharp, punishing rhythms that made junior analysts flinch and spill their coffee. Empty cups piled up on tables like sediment layers in a geological dig, each one marking another failed night of problem-solving. $67 million, Cassandra roared at Wednesday's stand-up, voice ricocheting off glass walls. That's our loss. If this thing isn't running by Friday, $67 million we should be using to crush 3 major markets. The engineering team, Harvard, MIT, Stanford, and Caltech on their resumes, sat frozen, laptops glowing with error logs they knew by heart. Their average salary hovered around $120,000. Their combined student debt climbed north of $2 million. None of it mattered now. The engine's AI brain refused to play nicely with the mechanical hardware. Whenever they thought they'd finally cornered the glitch, the system would overheat, cough smoke, and collapse. Team lead Daniel Cho, MIT class of 2019, wore eye bags so dark they looked like bruises no concealer could hide. His crew had thrown everything at the problem: firmware patches, hardware swaps, complete reinstallations of the operating system. They'd called in automotive veterans from Detroit, machine learning hotshots from Stanford, even hired a feng shui consultant after someone half-seriously suggested that the building's layout might be energetically misaligned with the engine's electronics. Cassandra's gaze prowled across the room, head turning slowly like a searchlight hunting for a scapegoat. Maybe the real issue, she said, letting each word linger like second-hand smoke, is that we're carrying too many people who don't belong here. Her eyes came to rest on Malik, who was quietly swapping out the empty water pitcher like a stagehand in the background of someone else's drama. Dead weight that drags down the whole operation. The jab hit bullseye. Several engineers glanced at Malik, embarrassment wrestling with agreement on their tired faces. Lisa Park from Berkeley shifted in her seat. She'd put in 12-hour days for 6 straight weeks and still hadn't cracked the puzzle. Somehow, blaming the maintenance guy for the company's failure fluttered through her exhausted brain as almost logical. Malik pretended not to notice. Invisibility had become his best survival tactic, but his engineer's mind refused to stay quiet. Numbers and schematics danced behind his eyes like persistent ghosts. Late at night, while he mopped the boardroom, he studied the blueprints abandoned on the table. The specs told a story the official teams had missed. The engine had been manufactured in Germany using metric standards. The AI calibration software, coded by a California partner, used imperial units by default. A seemingly minor conversion oversight could cascade into catastrophic behavior, especially in something obsessed with precision like this system. Malik saw it as clearly as a crooked picture frame. Pressure inside Tech Vanguard built the way steam collects under a sealed lid, silent until it suddenly screams. Security footage from the prior week showed Cassandra deliberately assigning Malik's cleaning rounds to overlap with high-stakes investor presentations. She paraded him through the background like a stage prop and told visitors loud enough for him to hear, "We believe in giving opportunities to everyone, even our maintenance staff." Her tone suggested charity, not respect. Emails were worse. Thread after thread reduced him to that cleaning guy, ignoring his official consultant title. Internal messages coolly discussed eliminating his position as part of necessary cost optimization. One especially callous chain, started by Cassandra herself, wondered aloud whether Malik could even read the company directory. HR manager Karen Doyle chimed in with laughing emojis under comments about his supposedly limited vocabulary. Their private cruelty would have been cartoonish if it weren't so real. The whispered commentary around the office matched the inbox venom. People talked about Malik like a necessary inconvenience, a diversity checkbox the company fulfilled but didn't value. At least he keeps quiet, one marketing director said, half joking over lunch. Better than the last maintenance guy who thought he should contribute ideas in meetings. The line got a few nervous chuckles. Malik heard more than they imagined and chose silence over open confrontation. The German investors arrived on Wednesday, their black Mercedes sedans sliding up to Tech Vanguard's entrance like a silent funeral procession. They represented 100 million euros in potential capital, money that could rocket the company into global dominance. Rolf Meyer, CEO of Bavarian Autotech Group, had flown in from Munich to judge the engine firsthand. His reputation for perfection made even veteran executives sweat under their tailored collars. Companies either astonished him or embarrassed themselves. There was no middle ground. Beside him walked Dr. Alicia Navarro, a former senior engineer at a major EV manufacturer and now a board advisor with global influence. Her name carried weight on 3 continents. She held dozens of patents, had redesigned powertrains other firms thought untouchable, and treated excuses like toxic waste. Her presence signaled that this wasn't just a polite investor tour. It was a trial. When Dr. Navarro audited a system, there were only 2 possible verdicts: brilliant or broken. The big demo was scheduled for Thursday afternoon. The company moved in a kind of nervous choreography. Marketing drafted triumphant press releases in advance. Sales teams built pitch decks for European expansion as if success were guaranteed. Downstairs, the kitchen staff stacked cases of champagne, chilling bottles in hope rather than certainty. Cassandra's unshakable facade began to show hairline cracks. By late Wednesday, her usually airbrushed makeup looked the tiniest bit smudged. Assistants hustled down corridors carrying armfuls of coffee, protein bars, and stress relief supplements like battlefield medics. The private executive restroom had become her screaming sanctuary. Security guards reported muffled yelling and the metallic clang of designer heels colliding with trash cans behind closed doors. Meanwhile, Malik kept moving through his routines. He watched engineers grind through 16-hour shifts, fueled by energy drinks and panic. Their theories about the engine grew stranger with each sleepless night. They blamed obscure software race conditions, hypothetical hardware resonance, even interference from the building's Wi-Fi mesh. One harried engineer muttered something about the office's bad energy field, disrupting the machine's electronic harmony. Malik almost laughed. Almost. During his late-night rounds, he paused outside the engine test room and just listened. The machine spoke in subtle vibrations and shifting tones that reminded him of his grandfather's old garage. Every engine has its own voice, Ernest Johnson used to tell him in Detroit. You just gotta learn its rhythm. This engine sounded like it was fighting itself, like 2 instruments playing slightly out of tune in the same song. Thursday morning detonated into chaos. The final pre-demo diagnostic ended in disaster, filling the boardroom with smoke and triggering the overhead fire suppression. Engineers stood drenched in gray chemical mist, their high-end laptops ruined in seconds. The burnt plastic stench of fried circuitry blended with the acrid smell of suppressant foam, settling over the room like failure you could taste. Rolf Meyer watched with expressionless composure, his face carved from European stone. Dr. Navarro scribbled notes in sharp, practiced strokes, each line capturing another flaw in painful detail. The other German delegates exchanged loaded glances, calculating whether their private jets could depart ahead of schedule. Cassandra hurriedly summoned an emergency all-hands meeting. 200 employees crammed into the main auditorium, faces a mosaic of dread, exhaustion, and brittle hope. The German guests lined the front row like a jury. Malik hovered near the exit, almost part of the wallpaper. "Ladies and gentlemen," Cassandra began, voice steady, though her fingers strangled the podium. "We are facing the most critical challenge in our company's history." Behind her, a slide displayed the stalled engine like a crime scene photo. Our revolutionary power unit, the heart of our autonomous fleet, is still non-operational. Our engineering teams have exhausted conventional strategies. Her pause allowed the collective sense of failure to drift over the room like settling dust. "Be effective immediately," she continued. "We're initiating cost reduction measures." The phrase landed like a hammer. Non-essential personnel will be terminated, starting with roles that do not directly contribute to resolving this crisis. The auditorium sank into a stunned hush. Only the soft whoosh of air conditioning and a few muffled sobs disturbed the stillness. Cassandra's gaze skimmed over the crowd, searching for sacrifices like an executive reaper. Her eyes finally settled on Malik with unsettling interest. That was when Malik made what most people would call a mistake. He lifted his hand. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the acoustically tuned room, "I think the issue might be in the harmonic frequency calibration, not the software integration." 200 heads pivoted toward him at once, as if pulled by hidden strings. The German investors sat up straighter, curiosity cutting through their boredom. Dr. Navarro's eyebrow arched almost imperceptibly. Cassandra's face went through a rapid cycle: surprise, then fury, then a flash of inspiration that was far more dangerous. She hadn't anticipated being challenged by a man who emptied trash cans. But the sudden interest from their European guests offered her a new opportunity, not just to fire Malik, but to publicly break him. The kind of warning shot that would make everyone else think twice before speaking up. "Well, well," she said, her voice amplified and dripping sugar-coated poison. "Our maintenance consultant has a theory about advanced engineering." She spat the job title like it tasted bad. She stepped away from the podium, letting her heels announce each step. "Malik Johnson, right? The man who cleans our offices thinks he understands what 67 MIT and Harvard graduates couldn't crack." Uneasy laughter rippled through the crowd, like static on a bad line. Employees shifted in their seats, torn between horror and morbid fascination. This wasn't a meeting anymore. It was an execution being filmed in high definition. Dr. Navarro uncapped an elegant fountain pen and opened a leather notebook. In 4 decades of solving problems others called impossible, she'd learned that breakthroughs often came from unexpected voices. Her mentor once told her that genius rarely wore a name tag. She never forgot that lesson. "Since you're so certain," Cassandra continued, tone bright with theatrical cruelty, "let's give you a chance to shine." She gestured toward the German delegation, her arms sweeping like a game show host, unveiling a prize wall. "Fix our $2 million prototype. Do it in front of everyone. Our board, our investors, this entire company." She smiled at the front row. "These gentlemen represent 100 million euros in potential capital. They came to see American innovation. Let's entertain them." The auditorium buzzed with shocked whispers. Malik stood beside his scuffed maintenance cart, the wheels squeaking softly whenever he shifted his weight. This was the exact moment his grandfather had prepared him for, not through fancy degrees, but through years of grease-stained lessons about listening when machines tried to talk. Rolf Meyer's face remained unreadable, but his assistant's fingers flew across a tablet, documenting every second for a report back in Munich. Cassandra's smile turned predatory. "Here are the terms, Malik. You get exactly 2 hours to diagnose and repair what our supposedly elite team hasn't fixed in 6 weeks. If you somehow pull it off, and we both know that's unlikely, I'll promote you to senior engineering consultant personally, with the salary and stock package to match." Gasps and murmurs rolled through the audience. That role meant 6 figures and equity, far beyond janitorial paychecks. "But when you fail," Cassandra added, her smile sharpening into an invisible blade, "you're not just out of a job. You're barred from this building for life. Security will escort you out, and I'll make sure every major tech firm hears detailed stories about your reckless incompetence." She flicked her fingers. 2 security guards appeared near the side doors like summoned muscle, their presence less subtle than the threat they represented. This wasn't just about an engine. It was a cautionary tale being staged for maximum fear. Dr. Navarro suddenly rose from her seat, drawing the room's attention the way a shift in gravity would. At 65, she carried a kind of authority that needed no introduction. Titles followed her name the way shadows follow light. When she spoke, seasoned engineers stopped typing and listened. That was simply the rule. "I'll serve as the technical witness," she announced, her voice calm but edged with steel. "This evaluation needs neutral oversight to ensure the process is fair and the results are credible." Cassandra's confident mask slipped for half a heartbeat. She hadn't planned for that. With Dr. Navarro overseeing things, this challenge stopped being a petty humiliation and became an official, technical trial. Rolf nodded once, clearly approving the injection of rigor. "Excellent," he said, his English crisp and deliberate. "Mr. Johnson, you have our full attention. We're very interested in seeing how you approach this problem." His tone was polite, but everyone heard the underlying judgment. This was a test, not just of Malik, but of the company's culture. The auditorium hummed as employees exchanged rapid texts, already drafting messages about the spectacle unfolding before them. Cassandra realized the narrative had slipped partially out of her hands, but she refused to back down. "Fine," she said, jaw tightening. "Dr. Navarro can observe your attempt, Malik, but I'm adding one more condition." She pointed toward the media cameras Tech Vanguard normally used for internal trainings and quarterly announcements. "We're live streaming this challenge across all our corporate social channels. Let our followers see what happens when unqualified people play engineer." That idea sent the marketing team into motion like someone had fired a starting pistol. Assistants scrambled to adjust lighting rigs and camera angles. Social media managers huddled over their laptops, spitballing, Hashtags: Tech Vanguard Challenge, Engineering Trial, Innovation or Illusion. In minutes, the company's LinkedIn, Instagram, and internal portals would be broadcasting Malik's make-or-break moment to thousands of employees, partners, and lurking competitors eager for gossip. Malik remained still, the fluorescent lights glinting off the metal frame of his cart. His calloused hands didn't shake. Inside, his heart pounded so hard he could feel the beat in his neck, but his grandfather's voice cut through the noise. Engines don't care about status, kid. They only care who understands them. Dr. Navarro walked down the aisle toward him, her footsteps measured and unhurried, like she had all the time in the world. She stopped in front of him and studied his face as if he were another complex system to analyze. "Young man," she said in a low tone, meant just for him, "are you absolutely certain you want to go through with this? This isn't just tinkering in a garage. Your career, your reputation, your whole future here will rise or fall on what happens next." The room's chatter faded to a low, distant buzz. Malik met her gaze without flinching. "Ma'am," he replied, "I've been listening to engines my whole life. This one's been trying to tell us what's wrong. Nobody's been hearing it right." Dr. Navarro's eyes softened just for a second. Something in his expression reminded her of the hungry young engineers she'd mentored years ago. The ones who stayed after hours, driven by curiosity instead of performance reviews or bonuses. She tucked that impression away carefully. Decades earlier, another engine had changed everything for Malik. Detroit, 1995. The auto plants were shedding jobs, but Ernest Johnson's modest garage on the edge of 8 Mile still throbbed with life. At 78, his movements had slowed, yet there was a precise grace in the way he handled tools. 12-year-old Malik squinted through the smudged garage window, watching his grandfather coax life from a battered Mustang everyone else had pronounced dead. 3 other mechanics had written the car off as scrap. Ernest saw something else. He ran his fingers along the engine block like a doctor feeling for a pulse. "Get in here, boy," he called, without glancing up. "Time you learn something that'll actually feed you." That summer flipped Malik's world upside down. While other kids played video games, he inhaled gasoline and motor oil, baptized in the noise and rhythm of real machines. Ernest had been one of the first black foremen at a major automaker back in the 70s, earning respect the hard way in rooms that barely tolerated his presence. He'd done it by being too good to ignore. "Listen," he'd say, guiding Malik's hand onto a running engine. "Feel that? That's 4 cylinders keeping time together. 8,000 tiny explosions a minute. All that chaos working in sync if you keep it tuned right." His philosophy was brutally simple. Engines don't care what color you are or what school you went to. They only respond to whoever listens properly. He taught Malik to read problems in the twitch of a needle, the shift in vibration, the smell of exhaust. A faint rattle, maybe bearings wearing down. A strange burnt scent, possibly coolant leaking where it shouldn't. None of this lived in standard textbooks. It was inherited craft, passed like a secret. The lessons bled into life advice. Ernest knew what it meant to walk into an industry that tested black workers twice as hard and credited them half as much. "They'll assume you're slower, son," he'd mutter, wiping oil from his hands. "But when you fix what they can't, all they see is results. Engines don't lie. That's your advantage." By 16, Malik could strip and rebuild a powertrain faster than most new dealership hires. Community college instructors blinked in surprise when he casually corrected textbook diagrams with real-world nuance. One professor joked that Malik must have been born in a tool chest. But life had its own timing. Ernest collapsed of a massive heart attack during Malik's senior year of high school, dropping beneath the hood of a Cadillac he'd nearly finished repairing. They buried him with the wrench still sitting on his workbench. The funeral overflowed. Auto workers, engineers, neighbors whose cars he'd resurrected, they all came to pay respects to the man whose legend lived in the vehicles he'd saved from the junkyard. They spoke of his refusal to cut corners, his uncanny ability to hear what engines needed. The bank forced the sale of the garage to cover bills. The tools were auctioned off piece by piece. Malik's inheritance wasn't money. It was muscle memory and mindset. When his mother Loretta was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer during his second year at community college, the dream of transferring to a 4-year university turned from plan to fantasy. Dorm life and campus clubs couldn't compete with chemo schedules and prescription costs. Student loans couldn't cover both tuition and her treatment. Malik picked up extra shifts, overnights at a gas station, weekends at an auto parts store, dawn cleaning contract offices, while grinding through engineering classes. Sleep became optional. He catnapped in library chairs between labs. Still, his grades stayed flawless. Professors noticed. Dr. Patel, who'd once taught at a major research university before burning out on politics, pulled him aside after a presentation on engine efficiency. "You have instincts I usually see at MIT," she told him. "Don't let circumstances smother that." He smiled politely, but the reality was harsher. Circumstances weren't just knocking, they'd kicked down the door. Insurance only handled a portion of Loretta's chemo bills, leaving thousands in uncovered costs each month. Malik funneled everything he earned into keeping her alive. That thick folder labeled transfer applications collected dust on his desk, pages never mailed. After graduating with his associate degree, he took any work remotely connected to mechanics, small shops, industrial maintenance, contract gigs. Eventually, a staffing agency placed him at Tech Vanguard as a technical support contractor. The recruiter made it sound like an entry point into engineering. The reality turned out to be floor polishers and trash bags instead of CAD software and simulation models. But the paycheck cleared and Loretta's medications kept arriving. 3 years later, Malik still carried his grandfather's philosophy like a flame cupped against the wind. He devoured online courses in nights and weekends, machine learning, automotive diagnostics, AI integration, trying to keep his skills sharper than his mop. His tiny studio apartment looked more like a cramped LAB than a home. Stacks of manuals leaned against the walls. Old engine parts sat half disassembled on his coffee table, each component labeled with sticky notes. Bookmarks filled his browser with research papers and white papers. Whenever despair whispered that he'd been permanently demoted to cleaning guy, Ernest's voice cut in, "The machine doesn't care about your paycheck, boy. It just wants someone who understands it." Now, standing in Tech Vanguard's auditorium, Malik felt that presence like a steady hand on his shoulder. The broken engine upstairs wasn't that different from the Mustang in '95, just newer metal and fancier code layered over the same basic truths. Engines either ran in harmony or they didn't. The auditorium's silence thickened around him, every eye waiting to see whether the janitor would crash and burn or somehow change the story. The ventilation system's gentle roar sounded suddenly like a storm. Cassandra gripped the microphone again, her polished composure sliding back into place. She hadn't thought of Malik as anything more than a convenient prop. Now the Germans were staring at him like he might actually matter. That made her nervous and angrier. She cleared her throat, eager to reclaim center stage, but the gravity in the room had shifted. Malik was part of the equation now. He could feel invisible calculations happening behind every pair of eyes. Some employees silently rooted for him, if only because watching the powerful get proven wrong held its own seductive thrill. Others hoped he'd fail spectacularly, terrified of what it would mean if the janitor outperformed them. Meanwhile, the cameras were still rolling, streaming every flicker of expression to whoever watched Tech Vanguard's feeds. Recruiters, investors, competitors, and anonymous spectators scrolling on lunch breaks. Cassandra adjusted her blazer and forced a bright smile. "All right, everyone, enough speculation. Mr. Johnson has his chance. 2 hours, starting as soon as he lays a hand on that engine." She nodded toward the back. "Facilities, escort him to the lab. Engineering, give him access to whatever he needs. Dr. Navarro, please verify that he isn't assisted." The implication hung in the air like smoke. If Malik succeeded, she'd need someone to blame. The security guard shifted closer, not touching Malik, but framing him in silent brackets. It was intimidation dressed up as protocol. He simply nodded, pushing his cart forward as the crowd parted. His steel-toe boots thudded against the polished concrete, a solid rhythm under the nervous murmuring. The walk from the auditorium to the engine lab felt both too long and not nearly long enough for the storm gathering around his next choices. Behind him, Rolf quietly leaned toward Dr. Navarro. "Do you believe he has any real chance?" he asked. She watched Malik's retreating figure for a beat. "Chance isn't the right word," she replied. "What I see is someone who isn't afraid of the engine yet. That alone makes him more interesting than half the people we've heard from today." Rolf nodded slowly, filing away her assessment like a data point on a complex chart. Inside the lab, the engine waited on its steel stand, cables draped like vines, diagnostic monitors blinking with dormant frustration. Malik set his cart aside as if he were clocking into a different job. The cameras repositioned for close-ups, tracking his movements. He could practically feel the virtual audience leaning in through their screens. Dr. Navarro took a spot near the control station, arms folded, her expression open, but analytical. This was now her experiment, too. "Before you begin," she said, "state your understanding of the problem." Her voice carried just enough to be picked up by the nearby microphones. Malik glanced at the monitor, then at the engine. "The system runs clean for 14 minutes and 37 seconds, then crashes with a harmonic disruption error. Teams have focused on software bugs and thermal issues. My guess is there's a mismatch between the physical resonance of the hardware and how the AI thinks it should behave." He didn't look at the cameras. He looked at the machine. If the engine's natural vibration pattern doesn't line up with what the software expects, especially with mixed unit systems, it'll fight itself until it overheats. Dr. Navarro's eyes sharpened. "You notice the unit mismatch in the documentation?" Malik shrugged lightly. "Hard not to, ma'am. Germany builds in metric. Some of the calibration code screams imperial. That kind of confusion never ends well for machinery." Upstairs, in the auditorium, the live feed played on the big screen. Cassandra watched, arms crossed, trying to read Rolf's expression. Employee chat threads erupted in side-channel commentary. Some joked that this was better than anything on Netflix. Others silently typed prayers, not sure who they were for. The stakes felt surreal. The company's future, a janitor's livelihood, and €100 million worth of judgment all funneled through one man and one very stubborn engine. Back in the lab, Malik rested his hand lightly on the engine housing, eyes closing for a few seconds. The room quieted around him. Even the techs holding their breath. He wasn't praying. He was listening. Ernest had taught him that sometimes, before touching a wrench, you just had to stand still and let the machine talk. The faint ticking, the subtle coil hum, the residual warmth, all of it formed a language he'd grown up translating. He opened his eyes and asked for the most recent full diagnostic logs, along with the original German hardware specs. The request sounded routine, almost casual, but his mind was already mapping frequencies, conversion factors, and torque curves. Behind the glass, Dr. Navarro watched him the way she'd once watched promising interns tear into unsolved problems. Cassandra, still on screen from the auditorium, didn't realize yet that the story she thought she was directing had shifted. In her imagination, this was supposed to end with Malik stumbling, stammering, and getting dragged out as a cautionary tale about knowing his place. Instead, the room held the charged stillness that comes right before something breaks or something changes forever. The janitor had stepped into the spotlight. The engine, silent for now, waited to see whether someone had finally come along who could hear its true voice. The camera zoomed closer as Malik leaned over the open panel, his brow furrowing in concentration. The whirring of cooling fans and distant office noise faded beneath the steady thump of his heartbeat. In that moment, he wasn't the guy who changed trash liners. He was the kid in Detroit, standing beside his grandfather in a garage that smelled like sweat and gasoline, learning that machines respected skill, not titles. The real test was finally underway. In the doorway, Dr. Navarro studied Malik's calm focus and saw a flicker of something familiar. Raw, unpolished talent standing on the edge of its first real trial. She stepped a little closer, not to interfere, but to witness. Whatever happened next would reshape careers, reputations, and maybe Tech Vanguard itself. Malik exhaled slowly, fingers brushing the edge of the engine housing. "All right," he murmured, almost to himself. "Let's see what you've been trying to tell them." That mix of hard-won knowledge, gut-level instinct, and calm certainty, that was what separated real genius from people who just passed exams. "All right then," Dr. Alicia Navarro said, raising her voice so the mics would catch every word. "Let's see what you've got." The challenge was now official. 2 hours to either validate or shatter a lifetime of hidden skill. Upstairs, the engine waited like a mechanical judge about to rule on one man's future. The river of employees surged toward the executive floor, phones up, recording every second of this once-in-a-career spectacle. The sleek executive boardroom morphed into a kind of corporate arena. Nearly 200 staffers pressed up against the glass walls, their reflections overlapping like a collage of doubt, hope, and office gossip. People jockeyed for position, whispering side bets and hot takes while the air thickened with a weird mix of dread and excitement. The German delegation settled into their leather chairs as if convening a tribunal. Rolf Meyer checked his platinum watch with that precise gesture only old-school industrialists seem to have. Dr. Navarro took her place near the engine, posture straight, expression alert, the way a seasoned surgeon stands before a critical operation. The damaged power unit dominated the center of the room, sitting on the polished table like some high-tech altar awaiting sacrifice. Polished steel and chrome segments glinted beneath the recessed LEDs, throwing off razor-edged shadows that hinted at both promise and ruin. Diagnostic gear circled the machine like medical equipment around a patient in critical condition. Laptops streaming endless error logs, oscilloscopes mapping jittery waveforms, temperature probes ready to scream at the slightest rise. For 6 grueling weeks, all that expensive equipment had done nothing but report failure in painfully precise detail. Cassandra Price stood near the wall of glass overlooking the Silicon Valley skyline, her silhouette framed in arrogant elegance. Her phone was propped perfectly for the company's live feed, comments and viewer counts shooting up in real time. The stream spread like wildfire through tech circles, forwarded in Slack channels and text threads from Palo Alto to Berlin. The unofficial consensus in the chat wasn't subtle. People expected a spectacular, meme-worthy failure. Malik approached the engine at an unhurried pace, his dark maintenance uniform clashing sharply with the tailored suits and designer dresses surrounding him. The low rumble of conversation faded as he set both hands on the engine block, closing his eyes like a musician laying palms on a grand piano before the first note. His breathing slowed. For a long half-minute, nothing moved except the blinking cursor on a diagnostic screen. Those 30 seconds dragged like hours. Employees glanced at one another, eyebrows raised, smirks forming on the faces of people already drafting sarcastic texts. A few engineers mentally rehearsed how they'd spin this disaster on their resumes if investors bailed. But Dr. Navarro's expression shifted first, curiosity, then sharp recognition, as Malik's face changed from cautious focus to that familiar look mechanics get when the puzzle finally snaps into place. "It's fighting itself," Malik said suddenly, his voice riding cleanly across the room's tuned acoustics. "The AI is doing exactly what it was designed for, but it's compensating for mechanical conditions that should never be there." He opened his eyes and looked straight at Rolf. "Sir, the core assembly was built in Bavaria using metric specs, correct?" Rolf's eyebrows crept up. "Correct. Precision down to hundredths of a millimeter. That is non-negotiable in our factories." "But the calibration code was written here in California," Malik continued. "Most American frameworks default to imperial units." Cassandra's carefully composed expression wobbled, just a millimeter, as she realized he knew the manufacturing chain better than some managers. Malik didn't gloat. His palm stayed on the warm metal as if listening. "That's your first failure point. The AI's controlling components, it thinks, are off by about 0.003 of an inch. Tiny mathematically, massive dynamically. It's like leading an orchestra," he added, "when every instrument's tuned just a hair off from what your sheet music expects. Eventually, the whole performance tears itself apart." He glanced at Dr. Navarro. "First finding, sound-based diagnosis." He nodded toward the controls. "May I spin her up?" Dr. Navarro, intrigued now, rather than merely polite, gave a single crisp nod. Malik hit the ignition. The engine thundered to life, filling the room with controlled fury. Most people heard only the impressive roar of a powerful machine. Malik heard a conversation. Ernest's voice brushed through his memory. Engines talk if you shut up long enough to listen. Hear that? He called over the rumble. Around 2,800 RPM, you've got a harmonic mismatch. Pistons are in their sweet spot, but the AI sensors report vibration patterns that don't match the parameters it was programmed for. He pointed at the jittery diagnostic visuals. Your teams have chased phantom software issues for weeks, Malik said, when what you really have is a mechanical harmony problem. He tapped a timestamp on the error logs. The reason it dies at exactly 14 minutes, 37 seconds, every time, is that's where the mismatch hits a critical resonance. Past that threshold, the engine's basically arguing with its own brain until it overheats and shuts down to avoid tearing itself apart. Dr. Navarro stepped closer, every trace of boredom gone. Walk me through your harmonic model, she said. Tone all business. Every engine has a natural frequency, Malik replied. A range where all the moving parts sync up perfectly. Less friction, smoother burn, maximum efficiency. This one was physically designed for about 3,400 RPM, but the AI was tuned using imperial-based expectations, so it's trying to hold a slightly different resonance than the hardware wants. He gestured toward the oscilloscope, where jagged lines twitched like anxious heartbeats. Those uneven spikes every 14 minutes? That's the system attempting to find its natural rhythm while the AI keeps yanking it back into a pattern that doesn't quite fit. Daniel Cho, the MIT-trained engineering lead, pushed to the front, face flushed. We tested harmonic behavior extensively during development, he protested. Malik nodded respectfully. You tested what the software anticipated, not what the hardware actually became. You tuned for the frequencies the AI thought should exist, Malik continued, but the real-world components came off the line singing a slightly different melody. Behind Rolf, several German engineers traded sharp whispers. This didn't sound like improvised nonsense. It sounded like someone articulating the exact integration blind spot no one wanted to admit existed. Second finding, Malik said, measurement mismatch. He began spreading printed schematics across the polished table like cards in a high-stakes game. His fingertip traced the fine print of the German drawings. Crankshaft, machined in Munich to 87.63 millimeters, he said. But your AI calibration expects 3.450 inches, which translates to 87.633 millimeters. He looked up. On paper, that's basically identical. But in a system this sensitive, that microscopic offset becomes a problem. Dr. Navarro leaned in, pen ready, following his conversions line by line. German machining tolerances sit around plus or minus 0.001 millimeter, Malik continued. American mass production tolerances often swing closer to plus or minus 0.005 of an inch, about 0.127 millimeters. He picked up a digital caliper, measuring components with easy, practiced movements. Your pistons, rods, even the timing chain, every piece here is built to the tighter German tolerance. But the AI assumes sloppier ranges and keeps trying to correct perfection. That creates cumulative timing drift, he said, voice gaining momentum. The AI believes it's trimming out manufacturing errors that aren't actually there. It's like a conductor constantly fixing musicians who are already perfectly on pitch, pushing them off instead. Those tiny, constant micro-adjustments become a synchronization avalanche. The livestream chat exploded with commentary as engineers from across the industry began chiming in. Screens filling with equations, quick simulations, and stunned emojis. Daniel scanned the numbers, his skepticism melting. The tolerance differential would absolutely accumulate into timing discrepancies, he muttered, MIT training finally syncing with Malik's street-level insight. Rolf rose and stepped in beside them, German pride demanding his own verification. He ran through the math, lips moving silently as he recalculated key figures. After a long moment, he straightened. The analysis is correct, he said, voice quiet but decisive. It was not a compliment, given lightly. And third finding, Dr. Navarro said, eyes locked on Malik. If you're right, what's the fix? People braced for talk of rewriting code bases and redesigning hardware. Instead, Malik crossed to a storage cabinet where spare parts waited in neat plastic bins. He pulled out a simple metal disc, about the size of a thick coaster, pierced with precisely placed holes. Holding it up, he turned to the crowd. A harmonic damper, he explained. A translator, basically. Instead of rewriting the AI to match German tolerances or remachining the engine to fit American expectations, we add this. He tapped the disc to absorb and smooth out the resonance gap. Cassandra's poise finally cracked. You're telling me a part that costs maybe $50 fixes what's burned through 6 weeks and millions in consulting? Malik shrugged slightly. Elegant engineering isn't about expensive. It's about matching what is to what should be. The AI and the mechanics are both excellent, he continued. They're just speaking slightly different dialects. This helps them meet in the middle. Then he got to work. His movements weren't flashy, just efficient, the kind of confident precision that only comes from years under hoods in cramped garages and poorly lit parking lots. Dr. Navarro watched as he mounted the damper into an unused bracket, hands steady, eyes scanning for any potential interference points. Where'd you pick up this level of resonance intuition, she asked, genuinely curious. Malik tightened the last bolt. My grandfather used to say, engines have souls, he replied. You don't cure a soul with a software patch. You listen, figure out what it needs, and help it settle into who it was built to be. The damper seated perfectly into existing mounting points. No hacks or redesigns required. A fix as neat as it was audacious. 12 minutes, someone whispered, glancing at the timer. That's all the installation had taken. No redesign meetings, no new procurement cycle, pure mechanical finesse. Malik stepped back, wiping his hands on a rag. She's ready, he said. The boardroom fell eerily quiet. Rolf checked his watch again. 1 hour and 47 minutes had passed since the clock started. Malik still had time, but everyone knew this test would be definitive. Pass or fail, nothing in between. If Malik's theory held, the engine should finally run like it was designed to. If he was wrong, he'd crash publicly, in front of his employer, a European industrial giant, and tens of thousands of viewers watching the stream. Dr. Navarro positioned herself at the diagnostic hub, fingers hovering over controls, ready to capture everything. The German delegation leaned forward as one, their posture telegraphing the same thought. This is the moment that decides everything. Fire it up, Dr. Navarro said. No theatrics, just command. The previous 67 attempts haunted the room. Every overheating alert, every smoke burst, every embarrassed shutdown. People wondered if a janitor with a community college degree could really succeed where carefully curated teams of high-priced talent had failed again and again. The engine sat waiting, metal gleaming, as if holding its mechanical breath before confessing whether Malik had truly understood its language. The key turned, the starter engaged, and the sound that followed shot straight through the crowd's nervous system. The boardroom filled with a deep, solid roar that shook the glass, but somehow felt smoother, cleaner. Right away, something was obviously different. The uneven rattle, the subtle offbeat stutter that had tainted every prior run, it was gone. In its place, 8 cylinders hummed together in a rich, confident chord that made veterans straighten instinctively. Dr. Navarro's eyes widened. This sounded like the kind of mechanical harmony engineers chase for entire careers. Malik rested his hand atop the engine casing again. Earlier, the metal had vibrated with hostile tension, like muscle cramping under strain. Now it thrummed with easy controlled power, the damper doing its quiet work. For the first time in 6 weeks, the diagnostic dashboards flooded with green indicators, bathing the surrounding faces in a soft, unbelieving glow. Temperatures leveled out and held steady. Cylinder pressures lined up with textbook-perfect consistency. The angry red error flags that had haunted screens for over a month vanished, replaced by clean, continuous data streams. "Mein Gott," Rolf whispered, his mask of composure cracking as numbers climbed past even optimistic projections. Efficiency peaked at 97.3%, 3 full percentage points higher than the theoretical ceiling his own Munich engineers had predicted. No one in the room missed that. Dr. Navarro moved from monitor to monitor, tracking readouts the way a conductor follows sheet music. "Oil pressure steady in the optimal band," she called out. "Coolant temperature stabilized at 187 Fahrenheit. Harmonic frequency locked at 3,400 RPM with 0 drift." She looked up at Malik, something like awe in her expression. "In 4 decades of engine work, I've never seen diagnostics this clean." She took a breath. "Your grandfather would be honored." The real question came from Cassandra, who clung to skepticism like a life raft. "Fine," she snapped, voice brittle. "It's running. But can it actually drive our autonomous platform under real conditions?" Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, employees could see Tech Vanguard's prototype delivery truck sitting in the courtyard, glossy and useless for weeks without its power source. Malik nodded toward it. "Only one way to know," he said quietly. "Let's hook her up and find out." The engine's output was routed into the drivetrain and electrical systems with carefully monitored precision. On the big screens, they watched the energy flow through the vehicle's digital nervous system. One by one, dormant subsystems woke up. The truck's dash lit like a Christmas display coming online. Autonomous navigation software booted, GPS connections locked, radar arrays began sweeping, and camera feeds sharpened into crisp, real-time video. The crowd pressed even closer to the glass, hardly blinking. The headlights brightened as the powertrain fed steady current into the vehicle's circuits. Down below, the truck eased into motion, guided not by a human driver, but by the very AI that had seemed cursed only hours before. It backed neatly out of its spot, gliding around landscaping stones and concrete barriers with algorithmic calm. When it executed a perfect parallel park between 2 employee cars, the boardroom erupted into applause that drilled through the glass. Minutes slipped by. 14, 15, 20. The infamous shutdown mark came and went with no flicker, no hiccup, no error tones. The engine just kept humming, running cooler and smoother than any prior test. As if relieved, someone had finally stopped forcing it to be something it wasn't. After 37 flawless minutes under mixed load, the systems continued steady, performance curves holding tight in the very center of their ideal bands. Rolf's assistant hammered on her tablet, capturing every data point for later deep-dive analysis. The other investors leaned together, whispering in German, their skepticism fully replaced by a hungry kind of excitement. On the live stream, viewership blew past 50,000 and kept climbing. Engineers from competing firms, startup founders, students, and random onlookers all watched a maintenance worker demonstrate what their prestige teams had proudly failed to deliver. It was both inspiring and professionally terrifying. "Shut it down," Dr. Navarro finally ordered. "We've seen enough." The engine wound down from its high, settling into stillness with a soft mechanical sigh, like a marathon runner easing to a stop after crossing a finish line. The dashboards remained green as systems powered into standby, almost reluctant to turn off. Outside, the autonomous truck rolled back into its original spot and shut itself down, every indicator light going dark in perfect sequence. For a few long heartbeats, no one spoke. The weight of what had just happened settled over the room like fresh snow. Quiet, undeniable, reshaping everything. 6 weeks of failure, millions in sunk cost, and an impending corporate disaster had been undone in under 2 hours by the man who took out their trash. Dr. Navarro stepped toward Malik and extended her hand, not as a courtesy, but as one engineer greeting another. "Nay, that was extraordinary," she said. "You didn't just find a bug, you reframed the entire problem. Where everyone else saw a software crisis, you heard a mechanical symphony out of tune and brought it back into harmony. Your fix was cheap, elegant, and brilliant." Rolf joined them, his handshake firm. "Mr. Johnson," he said, "your diagnostic approach impressed our whole delegation. This is precisely the kind of thinking that underpins durable industrial partnerships." Across the room, Cassandra stood by the windows, still clutching her phone. The live stream she'd meant as a public humiliation had turned into a highlight reel of her worst judgment calls. The chat was no longer speculating about Malik's failure. It was dissecting hers, frame by frame. The pivot point had passed. What remained now was fallout, legal, financial, and cultural, and the question of whether Tech Vanguard would learn from this or just spin it. Dr. Navarro's voice cut through the murmurs like a clean blade. "Based on everything we've seen," she announced, addressing Rolf and the room, "I'll be advising the board immediately." She faced the investors directly. "Malik Johnson has demonstrated rare diagnostic insight and innovative thinking that surpasses anything I have seen from traditional teams in years. His work was rigorous, his math sound, his solution minimal yet transformative." Heads around the table bobbed in agreement. Rolf nodded slowly. "Our delegation concurs," he said. "Mr. Johnson's methodology impressed every member of our evaluation team." He glanced toward his assistant's tablet, confirming figures. "We are prepared to increase our committed investment by 20% on one condition, that Mr. Johnson lead our joint European engine diagnostics and development initiative." A stunned hush swept through the room. 20% meant roughly 20 million additional euros and a whole new level of influence. Additionally, Dr. Navarro added, uncapping her fountain pen, "I'm bypassing normal promotion pathways." She turned to Malik. I'm recommending immediate elevation to Senior Engine Diagnostics Engineer, effective today. Compensation will be aligned with market rates for someone with demonstrated specialty in advanced harmonic systems. On the livestream, comments exploded into celebration. Recruiters from rival companies dropped not-so-subtle hints. The hashtag #WhatMalikJohnson began trending across engineering forums and even mainstream tech feeds. Daniel stepped forward, shoulders squared, the earlier defensiveness gone. On behalf of the entire engineering team, he said, "We owe you a formal apology for not listening sooner. We'd be honored to collaborate and learn your diagnostic approach." Clearly, there's a lot the textbooks didn't teach us. The transformation was complete. In under 2 hours, Malik had gone from background scenery to central architect, from invisible custodian to recognized technical leader with international responsibilities. The partnership was saved. The engine crisis was over. Tech Vanguard's outlook flipped from desperate to dazzling. Yet the most emotionally satisfying moment hadn't happened yet. Cassandra still stood at the edge of the room, live stream running, as thousands of viewers watched her face cycle through denial, shock, and dawning panic. The same audience that had tuned in expecting a humiliation spectacle was about to witness something much rarer: public accountability at the executive level. The mood in the boardroom shifted like a cold front rolling in. What Cassandra had framed as corporate entertainment had become a case study in failed leadership. The German visitors exchanged looks that spoke volumes. Rolf's assistant quietly relayed social metrics: over 100,000 viewers, shares across LinkedIn and X, commentary from tech journalists. The hashtags Tech Vanguard drama and engineering justice surged. Cassandra's every smirk and condescending remark was now archived in high definition. Dr. Navarro shut her notebook with a decisive click. "The board will need a full review of how this was handled," she said. Specifically, why an employee with this level of capability was sidelined into maintenance while we burn capital on consultants who produced nothing. The words hung heavy. Cassandra's complexion turned from executive tan to chalk. She had orchestrated this entire event, assuming Malik's failure was guaranteed. Now she stood in its blast zone. Rolf added, "Our confidence in any partnership depends on leadership judgment. Today suggests repeated misevaluation of talent and poor use of resources. This is unacceptable risk for a joint venture of this scale." One of the senior board members, Eleanor Grant, known for her no-nonsense governance style, finally spoke. "Our oversight committee will investigate how these decisions were made," she said. "We must understand why a senior-level engineer was effectively disguised as custodial staff." The investigation unfolded quickly. Cassandra's email history read like a textbook on how not to manage people. Messages casually calling Malik the cleaning guy, despite his consultant title. Instructions to schedule his routes during investor tours, citing optics. Threads suggesting his eventual termination as a convenient cost-cutting gesture. HR Director Monica Herrera, who'd peppered those threads with laughing emojis, suddenly found herself fielding questions from legal about hostile workplace dynamics and biased employment practices. The viral stream had become more than a PR event. It was evidence. Employment lawyers flagged clips, compliance officers drafted memos, and crisis managers scrambled to contain potential damage. 2 weeks later, the consequences landed with clinical precision. Cassandra wasn't fired. The board wanted to avoid turning her into a martyr in court filings. but she was stripped of real authority, reassigned from CEO to strategic advisor, a title that sounded impressive but came with neutered power. Her pay took a 40% hit. Decision-making rights transferred to a newly empowered executive committee. The most surgical blow was symbolic: mandatory leadership and bias training. Cassandra, who had mocked Malik's potential for 3 years, now sat through workshops on equity, listening exercises, and inclusive management. Ironically, the principal facilitator for several sessions was Dr. Navarro, who approached culture problems with the same unsparing clarity she applied to engineering flaws. Cassandra had no place to hide. Meanwhile, Malik's ascent didn't stop with a title change. His new role came with a 150% salary bump, meaningful stock options, and the mandate to build an internal diagnostics practice. He also chaired a cross-functional, inclusive innovation task force, charged with making sure no one with talent would disappear into the background as he had. New policies required formal review of employee ideas, regardless of department, and anonymous channels allowed frontline workers to submit technical observations. Investors loved it. The story played well in both engineering circles and broader media. Tech Vanguard's stock ticked up over 15% in the weeks following the incident, helped along by glowing think pieces about real meritocracy and listening to talent from the ground up. Incoming resumes surged. Applicants referenced the livestream, saying they wanted to work somewhere that might recognize brilliance even when it arrived in steel-toe boots instead of Italian leather. 3 months later, the most unexpected scene unfolded in the company cafeteria. Cassandra approached Malik alone. No cameras, no entourage. Her usual armor, designer suit, diamond accessories, had been subtly downgraded. She looked smaller somehow, less bulletproof. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "No spin, no preamble. And I'd like your input on how to become the kind of leader who doesn't miss people like you again." For once, she sounded more student than tyrant. Malik studied her for a long moment, thinking of earnest, of second chances, of engines that misfired until someone finally tuned them right. "Everyone can learn," he said, "but it starts with actually listening. The same way you'd listen to a machine that isn't running right. You don't blame the engine for telling the truth. You pay attention, adjust, and respect what it's trying to show you." Cassandra nodded, absorbing a lesson she should have known years earlier. Corporate justice, when it came, wasn't about revenge. It landed like a carefully calibrated correction, measured, instructive, and strangely hopeful. 6 months after the livestream, Malik stood in a new wing of Tech Vanguard's expanded engineering facility. German technicians installed advanced test rigs along one wall, preparing for joint production runs. His harmonic insights now underpinned autonomous delivery fleets in Munich, Frankfurt, and Berlin, their engines humming along freeways with the same balanced rhythm he'd first uncovered. Back in his modest apartment, the framed community college diploma still hung in its original spot. But now, it shared the wall with patent certificates, industry awards, and a glossy photo from the Munich Auto Expo showing Malik shaking hands with Rolf in front of a prototype truck. Ernest's old lessons from that Detroit garage had evolved into multi-million-dollar engineering decisions that shaped international supply chains. The path had been rough, but the logic felt inevitable. The story that had started with condescension and a rig challenge ended up reframing an entire company's culture. It proved something Malik had always known in his bones. True expertise doesn't always wear the right title or sit in the right office. It can push a mop all day and still outthink a room full of diplomas at night. The real question isn't who collects the biggest paycheck, it's who's willing to understand the problem completely. If this story pushed you to question your own assumptions about coworkers, about credentials, about who belongs in which room, don't just scroll on. Follow along, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next deep dive into real-world justice and unexpected brilliance. And seriously, think about the Maliks in your own life, the people whose potential everyone overlooks. You might be standing next to the person who will save your company someday. We want to hear from you. Have you ever watched someone's talent get completely ignored because of their job title, background, or appearance? Maybe it even happened to you. Drop your story in the comments. The most powerful ones might fuel our next feature. Another tale where someone society underestimated finally gets the mic, the spotlight, and the chance to prove what they've always known about themselves and the work they were born to do. There's one more twist for the detail-obsessed. Somewhere around the 4-minute 32 mark of the original livestream, there's a tiny moment that reveals who Cassandra really is underneath the polish. It's easy to miss on a casual watch. Just a flicker in her eyes, a reflexive movement, a split-second reaction before she remembers the cameras are rolling. Go back, rewatch carefully, and see if you can spot the exact frame where her mask truly slips. When you find it, tell us in the comments what you noticed. Was it the way she looked at Malik when the data first turned green? The way her posture sagged when the Germans applauded him? Or something even subtler, some micro-expression you can't quite name but absolutely recognize? That tiny detail says more about character, power, and change than a dozen official statements ever could. We're curious to see what you catch. Because in the end, this isn't just an engineering story. It's a story about what happens when quiet competence finally collides with loud arrogance, and competence wins. It's about a guy who spent years cleaning around other people's brilliance, only to discover he'd been the missing piece the whole time. It's about the moment the camera turns, the narrative flips, and everyone has to ask, what if we've been valuing the wrong things all along? So if you're sitting in a job where people underestimate you, where they walk past your potential like it's part of the furniture, remember, Malik, keep learning, keep listening, keep sharpening your instincts in the shadows. Because when your moment comes, it probably won't give you much warning. It might arrive disguised as a challenge meant to break you. And that's exactly when you'll get the chance to show what you've really been building inside. And if you are in a position of power, managing a team, running a department, steering a company, ask yourself a harder question. Who are you overlooking right now? Who did you decide was just support, just admin, just maintenance, without ever asking what they know? The next breakthrough idea, the next critical save, might come from the person you barely notice. The engine doesn't care about titles. It only cares who actually understands how it works. Malik's story is proof that wisdom can come from a cramped apartment full of textbooks, from a closed-down Detroit garage, from someone balancing cleaning shifts with online courses at 3 in the morning. Genius doesn't always walk in wearing a custom suit. Sometimes it pushes a cart, holds a mop, and quietly studies blueprints while everyone else argues. The world only changes when someone finally stops long enough to hear what that person has to say. So go ahead, rewatch, analyze, argue in the comments. Debate whether the real turning point was Malik raising his hand, Dr. Navarro stepping in, or Rolf backing the investment. But don't miss the bigger pattern underneath. Systems are only as smart as the people they're willing to listen to. And sometimes the most important upgrade any company can make isn't new hardware or AI. It's a new respect for the human expertise hiding in plain sight. As you finish this story, take a second to think about the engines in your own life. The teams, projects, relationships that feel like they're constantly overheating and shutting down. Maybe the fix isn't to throw more money or software at them. Maybe it's to step back, listen carefully, and ask whether the people who really get the problem have ever been invited into the room. Malik didn't need permission to be brilliant. He just needed a chance. And that's the part we hope sticks with you long after you click away. Not the viral numbers, not the corporate fallout, not even the promotion and pay raise, though those matter. What matters most is the reminder that talent can come from anywhere, and that justice sometimes looks like a single person finally being seen clearly. When that happens, engines purr, companies pivot, and entire futures quietly shift onto a better track. If you're still here, you're exactly the kind of person we make these stories for, the ones who care enough to read all the way through, to study the details, to ask what it means beyond the headlines. So don't forget, subscribe, tap the bell, and stick around. We've got more real-life plot twists, more underdog wins, and more deep dives into how work, power, and potential collide in the messy world we all share. And keep sending us your own stories. That coworker who never got credit. The boss who finally learned to listen. The mistake that turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to your career. Your experiences aren't just comments. They're raw material for the next narrative that might encourage someone else to hold on, to speak up, or to recognize their own worth, even when nobody in their office seems ready to see it. Because somewhere out there right now, another Malik is pushing a cart down a hallway, mentally reverse engineering the company's most important system. Another Cassandra is about to discover that swagger isn't the same as leadership, and another engine, literal or metaphorical, is waiting for the one person who can finally hear what it's been trying to say all along. Maybe the next time this happens, you will be there to notice. Oh, and for the truly sharp-eyed among you, here's your final challenge. Somewhere around that 4-minute 32 mark of the footage, there's a blink and you miss it detail that gives away exactly who Cassandra is when she thinks no one's watching. Watch again, freeze frame, zoom in if you have to, then come back and tell us what you found. We'll be reading. And who knows, your comment might inspire our next story. For those of us in our 60s and 70s, Malik's story feels strangely familiar. Many of you spent decades in factories, offices, hospitals, and schools watching people with titles and shiny resumes get all the credit, while the folks who actually kept things running quietly pushed the cart, turned the wrench, or stayed late to clean up the mess. Malik, the janitor, who saved a $2 million engine while executives laughed at his oil-stained hands, is a reminder of something our generation has always known. Real skill doesn't always wear a suit. The letters after your name matter far less than the work you can truly do when things are on the line. A second lesson hits even closer to home. Many of you remember bosses like Cassandra, sharp, ambitious, and utterly sure they were smarter than everyone else in the room. She didn't just doubt Malik. She turned his life into a spectacle, betting her pride on his failure in front of investors and a live camera. In the end, it wasn't her strategy decks or her high heels that saved the company. It was the man she'd mocked as the cleaning guy. Older Americans have seen this pattern again and again. Organizations rise or fall not just on technology, but on whether leaders are willing to listen to the people they think are beneath them. The third lesson is about legacy and responsibility. When Malik finally got his chance, he didn't just grab a promotion and walk away. He pushed for new policies so no one with talent would be buried in support roles again. He used his new authority to open doors for others who looked like him, worked like him, and had been ignored like him. Many of you are thinking about your children and grandchildren, what kind of workplaces they'll face, how they'll be judged when they walk in the door. Malik's story tells us that justice at work isn't just about one big victory. It's about building systems that keep recognizing quiet competence long after the cameras are turned off. At our age, that may be the most important work of all. Making sure the wisdom we've earned over a lifetime helps the next generation be seen clearly from the very start. If Malik's journey struck a chord with you, I'd love to hear your perspective. Have you ever worked with a Malik, someone whose talent was ignored because of their job title, background, or appearance? Or maybe you were that person, doing the hard work while someone else got the spotlight. How did it shape the way you see fairness, leadership, and respect on the job? Share your story in the comments. Hit like if this resonated with you, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next real-life lesson we unpack together.